Look at us matchy today.
Yeah. Sorry, I know you're trying
Damn,
to
you
kick
blew
this
the opener.
I know you're trying to kick this off. I have like all these node processes running that are just destroying my system. So I need to go kill a bunch of stuff.
Node wants everything. It wants all of you. It doesn't like to share you with other processes. Haven't you learned that yet?
Node is supposed to be fast, but when you start having it do everything, it just eats your computer.
Node has async IO.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Did you see that tweet about the Mighty browser?
No, that's the one that runs in the VM.
Yeah. And the guy said he just onboarded and was able to use Figma and Chrome super fast, and his computer was getting slow. And he was saying exactly what you were saying earlier, which is, when the heck are the new M1s going to come out, because my computer's dying. And he's like, this is going to let me hold out to the new M1s, because he's like, I can use everything now.
So he uses Figma in the browser through like a remote desktop?
Yeah, and he said it's super fast.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, super cool.
Might be worth giving it a shot, you know? I mean, if it's really like not a lot of friction and it feels... You know, I'm sure it doesn't feel like using parallels or whatever, you know, because that's where my brain goes to.
Yes, same.
And like I would never want to develop like that, obviously, but
parallels like Docker desktop, it's just all it is not
terrible
fast in your dev environment.
Right. So might be worth just poking around if it's easy and quick and not too expensive, you know, try it out.
Yeah. Can I run VS Code? That's the thing. It's like my setup, like, I think
you can run VS Code locally, but then Chrome in Mighty might just free up your computer a lot. Maybe, you know, who knows? It might be Node and Node, and then you're just back to Node anyways. You know?
Yeah.
Did you? We were looking at that code spaces thing too. If you're listening to this and you haven't gone to GitHub yet and hit period on a repository, it's pretty cool. It opens up in like the browser in VS Code. Probably of interest to most people listening to this, so you should check that out. It's pretty awesome. There's people on Hacker News talking about code spaces, and they're like, why would I do that? I've spent years like tweaking my dev environment to suit me. And then like we're on this project where it's like you have to get the right node version, you have to have all these things running, you have to, you know what I mean? So that would be pretty awesome. To
also too, if stuff. You just you spent years getting your dev environment working, like that's say no more. Like
right.
That's exactly why.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Well, look at us matching today. Bright colors. It's a Friday. Sun's out. Let's see. It's 93 degrees in New York City. It was 93 yesterday, and they said it felt like 103 degrees. I wasn't outside much, but it was definitely hot. Makes it fun when you're looking at apartments, walking up 4 flights of stairs and waiting in line with 20 other people, though. That was fun.
Nice.
But yeah, man, excited for the weekend. You know, feeling good. Going to Louis C.K. tonight. That should be fun. And so we wanted to record this pod end of the week here. And I think we just want to talk about like some architecture, just like general React architecture stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you had a bunch of like really good items.
Yeah, cool. So the first one here is import order. So if you've been listening to the last few episodes, I think we might have talked about this a little bit, but we were experimenting. I've been experimenting with moving some initial kind of bootstrappy logic stuff to module scope in my fitness side project. So pulling like calls to Firebase and initial like session requests outside of React. And that's because it makes it easier to do that stuff, not having to worry about re-renders, putting it in an effect. It's not really concerned with pixels on the screen. and it gets to start right away as soon as the JavaScript is parsed and executed, instead of waiting for React to actually render that particular component, even if it's your kind of root component. So for all those reasons, like the more we do this and talk about it, the more it's like, oh, those are like little, indicators of like, oh, maybe this shouldn't be in React. Mm-hmm. And lets you coordinate with suspense and all that good stuff. So I ran into this interesting problem where I have my use auth hook, and it relies on some of this other code that needs to run, this auth initialization logic, let's say Firebase. So you have that code there, and then let's say in your like Bootstrap file, you need to actually like that stuff needs to actually run the auth code to start things up. So I ran into the situation where, let's say I had a component that was like, header with avatar, something like that. And the avatar needs to like use auth to get the current user, to get like the user's name and profile picture. So that's like a component that is going to statically import the use auth hook. And so that all is going to happen whenever that component is imported by, which you really shouldn't have to think about when you're developing. Like the module graph is just resolved. Kind of, that's how the ES6 module spec works. It figures out this whole cycle of like the whole graph of modules, loads them up. But then you have this problem where you sometimes want to, let's say, use Firebase, or sometimes you want to use like a test provider, whether you're developing locally or you're developing in Cypress in a test. So I ran into this race condition, or this order dependent condition, where I needed to first check if I'm in Cypress to, let's say, like boot up Mirage. But then it meant that my use auth hook wasn't ready until I got to that code. So use auth wasn't ready until I got to this init logic, which was like maybe boot Mirage. And the problem is like the other code, the other components that were importing this hook expected to be able to like call fetch session right in module scope. But fetch session wasn't ready because I needed to wait to run until I could set that up. Mm-hmm. So it fixed it if I like made sure the maybe start Mirage was before any other components were imported, like the header component was imported. But that's obviously like not a good solution at all.
Yeah, especially if someone just auto completes an importing component, it somehow gets added to the top of the file, and that component imports another component that imports something that uses auth. I mean, you could just spend all day trying to figure out why this order. Also, too, like we don't think of like, I mean, I have a few thoughts here, but like, we don't really think of like imports as changing our program. We think of imports as like statically analyzable, like dependency graph.
Exactly. But the thing is, once you start doing things in module scope, it's bingo. More likely that you will expose those things. And it's almost like I feel like doing everything in React buys you some laziness here, because you let it all sort itself out. And then, once render time is happening, all of that stuff's been taken care of already. And then you have a very predictable order in which all of this code's going to run, because it's running with the tree.
So I have I'm going to go down a few paths here. I've been thinking about this a lot this week. So I guess my first thing is like, maybe we shouldn't have side effects in module scope. Like maybe they shouldn't be in module scope. Like that doesn't mean they have to exist in React. You're just importing functions and you're invoking those functions. So you can control when things run, and therefore import order just won't mess up, won't cause code to run that you weren't expecting to run. And so that made me think like, okay, so like it kind of what you just said, like, deferring all this stuff till render makes it a lot easier, because the world has been set up for you and you can do all this stuff in render. But we kind of we've been through, it's really hard to do all this stuff in render, because now you have to deal with re-renders and effects. I think there might be a middle ground here. So I think we definitely know that setting up Firebase in an effect and then having it be like handle re-renders.
Robust to re-renders. Yep.
Yeah, and then robust to re-renders, and then also like updating refs when the user changes. You just like you can make it work, but you get in so much trouble. And there's something really elegant about Zustand stores you've been using.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the middle ground is like you still use an effect to like initialize everything, but you don't like your effect just calls like environment.initialize. So it's like
right.
test setup.initialize or development setup.initialize or production setup.initialize, whatever. So it's like you still have a function, so it's not a module scope. You use it in effect. It's like a side effect of rendering, and that way, like the world can be.
You have more control over the order in which all these different functions are running.
Yeah, and then so this is like you can help me flesh out this thought, but this is like kind of what I'm thinking about here. So like in React, we always have a render, right? There's no like life cycle. We always have a render. And so there's no real like, okay, bear with me. In UI development in this like React world, we don't have like a before our app renders place to run code. Now we can always like, if you're using create React app, you can always like run code before you call like, what is it now? Like
React DOM.render or whatever.
.render, yeah, whatever it is. But with Next, we don't really have a hook to do that. And I don't know if a hook to do that makes sense. Like we always have a render. It might be an empty screen while we're setting stuff up, but we always have a render. And so that made me kind of think like, okay, maybe like you kick off this stuff in your app's render, your app's effect, but like you don't have to manage Firebase in effect. That can all go to Zustand, and we've seen the benefits of that. So I don't know, like that. I know that was a lot, and I kind of went.
Yeah, no. It's tracking. I'm tracking. It's kind of where I went down in the first part is like you go down this path where like, okay, if you don't, like kind of snap your fingers. It's really nice if you're writing an auth provider that can like import your use auth or your auth store and call like fetch session and throw a promise until that resolves. And you just don't have to worry about it. Again, it's like you're following docs. You don't have this impedance mismatch between some method in Firebase that you're calling or even setting up a listener and then like thinking how that should handle re-renders if it has nothing to do with rendering or nothing to do with any of the props or state of that component. So you want to be able to do that, but then you run into this problem. So then you do what you're suggesting, which is maybe you have like a separate function there that like you export from the component that's like an initialized function, and then like in _app you could so that way there's no side effects in import, like there's nothing happening immediately, and so you have more control. So now you're importing all these initialized functions, you can control the order, and then you can kick that like master initialized function off predictably, let's say once in the root in an effect on first render. It's kind of recreating like the initialized stuff from Ember, and Rails also has this where you have this kind of plugin system and you can register things and you can say this add-on's init should run before this other add-on because there's a dependency there. Yep. And you can defer readiness on the app until this thing happens or until I receive a call from an auth server or whatever.
Yeah. The thing is though, like with React and with Next, like we can't defer readiness. We can't. So,
but this is effectively a proxy for that because you're just able to render something while all this is happening.
Render 0 pixels, basically. Exactly. Whatever you want to do.
Or a loading spinner or whatever, you know?
But it's still, it's kind of like, how do I meet in both worlds, right?
Exactly. So where my thinking is now is like you're kind of again recreating this whole like system. Yes. It's like it's like some ceremony. It's not standard, and it just kind of ends up because it's not really built into the framework or it's not conventional. There's no way to know that you have to do this, that you're not supposed to even set up a store in Zustand, because even in the Zustand docs, you're just importing create from Zestand and you're creating a store right there. And then you can just use it everywhere. So I basically concluded like this is not a good path because even though it's nice when you're writing, it makes it much easier if you can just say, oh, don't do this thing until this other thing's ready. What you really want to do is make your code robust to like module side effects. That's kind of what I think is the way to go. So like, for example, Zestand lets you create these shared stores. And if you create an auth store and have a current user property on it, and this component over here imports it first and does something, and this one over here imports it, it doesn't matter. Zestand is coded in such a way that, there's nothing bad that happens if someone imports it first and does something, because it just works that way. Same with like, the use SWR as cache. That's just something that it is a side effect. I mean, you import it and it creates an object. It's not scoped to a function. It creates a cache object in module scope that's ready to go when anyone needs it. So it doesn't have to wait. You can see the cache outside of React. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to wait for it to render. You don't even care if anyone uses the hook, or if they do, they can change the cache or whatever. So I think basically that you want to code it. It took some work, but you want to code it in a way that that makes it robust to this. So it's just, I just kind of feel like it's meeting like Next and like JavaScript and like React developers where they're at, which is like they really like everyone. We all really are just using these like APIs that are very minimal. And I don't want to import a class, create a class, register a plugin, and call initialize. It's just not going to fly. It's just It doesn't feel aligned with the rest of the APIs in the ecosystem, right? You want to just like import store from auth and like call like store.fetch session, and like whatever's happening there, you just want it to work,
So how are you dealing with if I like move the import to the top?
So what happened, really the fix actually was pretty straightforward in my case. But it did take a while just to understand the moving pieces. And really it was just that when I was in test mode, I've been setting up, I have Mirage and my test auth service that's covering Firebase set up so I can dev against it and write tests against it. It's going awesome. But the problem was originally was like, so this auth provider does import my use auth, my auth store, and calls fetch session in module scope, throws a promise for the beginning while all the initial bootstrapping logic is going so that the app can just render a single spinner until it's ready and fades in. And the problem was it calls like auth.fetch session or whatever. And my test one resolved instantly. So my test provider has a stubbed out fetch session method, and it was just returning a new promise that called resolve immediately inside the body of the promise with like my fake current user. And that caused the logic to go on in the auth provider component before the Mirage, maybe boot Mirage stuff had run. And so that was actually a logical bug in terms of my mock, my stubbed auth provider thing wasn't faithfully recreating Firebases because the promise would always resolve on like the next tick. So because the promise resolved synchronously, the code in auth provider continued on, but this maybe boot Mirage code, which was also running in module scope, like, you import maybe boot Mirage in _app, but you're outside of the React component when you say if, process.env should use mocks or whatever, boot Mirage. That's all happening in module scope too, but there was a race there. Like that needed to run before the next step of the auth provider code. And it always did when I used the real fetch session, but it didn't with my fake one. So all I did was like do a set timeout with no even argument there. And then that made fetch session truly asynchronous, and it became totally fine.
Gotcha. So the two solutions here are like, one is like change module order. The other is like just make sure that you're always going to have your auth stuff on the next tick so that like all your imports are done importing because...
Yeah, I think the generalized here is like first, like you need to make sure you're matching the signature and the type of everything that you're mocking or whatever, because if fetch session is never going to resolve synchronously, then in production code, it shouldn't in your test code, right?
I have a question here. Like, what would happen if like someone just like, being really hand wavy here, someone made like a synchronous fetch session, like whatever, like you're just like, there's like,
or like if Firebase was able to detect you have a valid token in the browser, and so it just resolves it synchronously. But then that would be a bug. That would have been a bug in my code already, so I would have had to fix that anyways.
Gotcha. You're saying this, it wasn't in development, so you never noticed, but in test it was, and so that's when you ran up against this.
Exactly.
Is there a way, like, do people just like call fetch session, or do you like control the calling of fetch session? Like, can you?
They import like store from auth, libauth, and then they call like, or whatever, store, and then they call store.fetch session. And and the callback of that, like in the .then of that, they're going to be expecting to fetch the current user from Hasura, which is mocked out with Mirage. So at that point, Mirage needs to be running, right? So that was the race condition right there. But like, more generally, like if you offer a hook that, or this, in this case, it's not even a hook, it's just a store that has a fetch session method on it, anyone should be able to import it and call it, and it should work. Even if multiple people call it, it should work. And in this case, again, the actual fix was very straightforward, and it was a fix because it was a bad mock of it. But it was an interesting point, and I think I've run into this before where it just made us think about this like initialization stuff and how like, you really want to do the work. I think it's easier to run into this stuff, especially when you start pulling things out of render, because of this problem where you don't get to wait until React starts rendering.
When everything is wrapped inside of a render function, it's the same thing as wrapping inside of like initialize.
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, I like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I landed on it, because I was thinking the same thing. I was like, man, Rails and Ember, all these frameworks have this really nice thought out plugin system. Like we really should have that. Like plugins can register, or like add-ons can register things themselves when you bring them in. But like you really kind of do need a predictable order. But like it's really this other perspective where it's like kind of small is beautiful, I guess. And you just have these isolated things where you can create a little store here or fetch a session. And it's like, you need to support this use case where like someone's just going to import this thing that you wrote, and they can do whatever they want to, and it should just kind of work. Like, and the way SWR does this is like they have a cache. So, if you have 3 components and they're all trying to query the current user, it's going to like deduplicate the request. It's going to use the cache if there's already been one of those made. It doesn't care which order you do it. So I just feel like that's more in line with the paradigm,
Yeah, absolutely. Also too, like you don't stop the render in React.
Right.
Where with Ember and Rails, like you have, like with Ember, you can literally stop the render. Like you can just say you're not rendering until I tell you. But So I think that philosophy matches. And so not breaking that and is
good. So it was a good lesson. No, but that's a good point to bring it back to that, which is just like, there is no notion of, you can't stop the, I mean, it's like, that's like an API that you could consider, you would think of adding, but it's like they've resisted that forever, and they will always, because it's just, they want one way to do it. And it's just like, you always have to give me a state of the app so I can render a frame. That's it.
You always have pixels. That's it. Have pixels.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So, and like, so it's, and like Ember always has pixels in a sense. If you navigate to a page, Ember has conventions that says we're navigating, so we're going to render like a loading screen, but it's how you decide what to render is different in that case than when you're just rendering a component. And that is the big difference with React, which is React is like, no, we render by re-rendering the entire tree. That's it. That's the only way to get rendering. There's no special cases for delaying things or getting what the pixels should be from somewhere else. It's always just the tree. What's the active tree? And run that function, and you return a result synchronously. That's it. So it's just kind of interesting. So I thought that was a little interesting thing. But no, it's happy to report like it's going well. And
nice.
it's super. It's so off. I really do love Mirage's DX and just being able to change things, and it runs super fast in tests. Both mocking out Firebase and this Hasura, and yeah, it's hard to beat, man. It really is. I know you've been working on getting Hasura like running locally, so you can write tests that actually hit like a running Hasura instance. But it's pretty awesome, to have it all in the browser. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
For sure. Like there's trade-offs, right? Trade-offs.
Yep.
So,
yeah. I think if especially when using something like Hasura, if they provided you with equivalent of a Mirage Hasura, there would basically be no trade-offs because it'd be their responsibility. You'd know if you made changes to your app and added an events table that you would get it in your mocks. They wouldn't fall out of sync.
But
GraphQL goes a lot. Yeah.
The seam doesn't move, where today the seam moves. So it's...
Yep. GraphQL really makes the story a lot better too, because just being able to use the schema takes away a lot of the boilerplate and a lot of the risk in terms of not fulfilling the contract. So I think it's like I'm inching there, but it's the type there's a vision here that's pretty cool.
The type errors eliminate a lot of the errors that you would generally run into if you were just mocking out an API.
Totally. If you add a new field to a table and you run your test suite, it's going to say you didn't give us the data for this field. Your Mirage server will say that because your Mirage server is just delegating to GraphQL request and the schema, which is coming from your production instance. So your mocks are already telling you if it's out of sync in a lot of cases, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Also too, like I think for like the CRUD layers of Hasura, you get super, super far with that. It's
that really is
what drove me to actually want to run Hasura was the aggregates and just not trusting myself to mock those out. Also too, there's just like some other stuff with like
nested relationships. So you have to, I'm kind of hard coding those right now, but I have a sneaky plan to generalize it.
There's a lot. Your auth stuff in Hasura is not as simple as you think it is, and it's code that you own.
Right.
And so to be able to actually test your auth stuff is something that like the schema can't tell you. And so I think that's like a good thing. That's another area.
No, that is another area that's hard to reproduce, but it also goes back to this discussion we had, which is like, if you're using email service, it depends on how complex your auth rules are. Mm-hmm. But if you're using an email service and that's like a web UI and you go and say, you send a reminder email every 7 days if they need to update their credit card. Do you write tests for that? Is that code you own? Like sometimes those lines are blurry. And if your auth rules are really high level and declarative in Hasura, there's sometimes I think what you test should be driven by your level of confidence and your need for testing. So, I don't run tests that like Heroku's running my app server. It's kind of like their thing.
Right. You don't write tests for validations in Rails.
Exactly.
You don't need...
You don't want to test the framework or whatever. Yeah.
Right. I think with the auth stuff, like you end up owning it, which is just...
No, it's true. I mean, my fitness app has like progress pictures. So you upload like half naked pictures of yourself, and only your own user can see your own pictures. And that'd be pretty important. That's like front page. Are we going to end up on the front page of Wall Street Journal or whatever if we have a problem here? So you'd want a test for that for sure.
Also, too, your auth, you have a Hasura server that's doing auth somewhere, and that's code you've written. You've probably forgotten about this, but that's code you've written. So I think that's one of the things that's like, it doesn't get tested, and there's a bunch of code in there. So,
but if there's not, I totally agree. I'm just playing devil's advocate. If there's not a lot of code, if it's basically always like, whatever we do, like user header x Hasura ID equals the current user ID, then like that would be.
The argument here is that it's not that it's not a lot of code. It's that you test in production because every single endpoint your production site uses hits this code. So you would see a bug. You would just see a bug right away. It's like the production tests are like enough for it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if it's an endpoint that like every single GraphQL request has to go through. So if it was buggy, you would know about it the moment it happened.
Right.
And so like,
assuming people are using your app.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you would know about it when you tried to use the app. So, it's tough, man. It's tough. I totally agree. Like Mirage Hasura would be the thing that just it doesn't even bend the trade-off curve. It snaps the trade-off curve. And it's just that seam doesn't move. And so I know that like whatever API request I send into Mirage, I'm getting the right thing back. I'm getting the right thing back.
No, I mean, I really want this. I feel like sometimes the best way to like change the world in the favor you want it to is like build a thing that solves your problem. I think it'd be awesome to like try to do a like hacky version of this generalized thing and show the workflow and like post it on YouTube and Twitter and like try to get Hasura people attention. Maybe they'll see it's a good idea. I mean, it goes back to like service providers giving users, their developers, ways to easily, use and test their services locally. And like you even said this like either last time or the time before, you're like, that would be a changer for me in terms of adopting a service,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I would hope that they would love that. Also too, like I think the generalizing, like this is where we always get into trouble, right? But I think the generalizing, like you can squint at the schema file and you can be like, I know what I need to generalize here.
Oh, totally. I'm going to get there. It's going to be like, it's going to like parse the schema, substring, and like, get the names of the thing. Yeah. It'll be there.
It's so fun from the stuff that I've been working on, which I haven't touched it in about like 2 weeks now. But once you have the Hasura instance running, which your tests set up and tear down, automatically, it's awesome.
Really, I want to see it.
Getting to that setup point is just, it is so brutal.
We'll have to pair on that. I want to see what it's like to create like a graph of data, before you and then visit a thing or whatever.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, cool. Related, I set up this Cypress command with server. So normally if you've used Mirage before, it's like synchronous. So you can just kind of like create a server and start creating data and then visit your stuff. I wanted to make a sci.withServer thing because I wanted to be able to make commands like create user and login, name Sam or whatever. And so my Mirage stuff, I wanted to be able to communicate with my mock auth stuff. So I have that. But that means now my tests, I have to do like, I can't do server.create or anything because it's being created behind the scenes, I guess. I really wish Cypress had some way of exposing like a context object or a this dot. Remember in Ember testing, you would just use this dot. Like if you wanted to do like this dot first name or whatever, or this dot user. And then like from a test, you could just do this dot user. Now in Cypress, you can do that with like free variables. So you can just say like let user here and like user equals and you'll get it. But to get access to the server, if the server is being created out here, there's no way to get it. So you do like the sci.withServer, you pass in a function which yields the server, and then it kind of works.
Why?
But it makes like the pattern, like the let pattern that you would use in Rails with factories, like not really possible. I mean, it's possible, but it's like, it's ugly. Yeah. It's not as ergonomic. And it's not as ergonomic as like vanilla Mirage.
Why did you move to, I guess I don't have the context, why did you move from sci.withServer versus booting the server in the test?
Because I wanted to be able to, first of all, I just wanted to boot the server in every test. That's fine. We were doing it before every test. Like I wanted it just to do it and not have to call create server within the test. That's so like secondary.
Cut out the before each and all that stuff. Yeah,
exactly. It's effectively before each for the whole suite, before each one.
And you're saying if you moved it into a global before each, now you have no way to access it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I see. And you wanted to share context.
Exactly.
I follow now.
Exactly. Or be able to do things like, this current user or whatever, or just yield, maybe like you would yield it out from like describe or it or something like that. But it's also like if you want to make something like if you want to create a user and log them in, you have to think about it. If you're using Firebase and Hasura, you need to create the user in Firebase. So like mock auth.users push an ID, then you need to create it and you need to set the current user ID on the mock auth. because like mock auth can have multiple users in it, and then there's one that's signed in, so you have like a current user ID, and then you need to get that same user into Mirage so that when you're querying Hasura, it's there, just like in production. So you want to wrap all that boilerplate into a command. So now if you want it in a command, how do you get, but you're making the server locally, like I guess you could pass the server in. You just want those things implicitly, you want to pre-wire those things together. So from the perspective of the test writer, you're not thinking about, auth service or Mirage or whatever. And it works.
And that's all hidden within with server.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because all the commands are in a file. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. So it works really well. It's just you lose a few things, and it would just be nice. It would be nice if you either had context or freaking Cypress let you use async await, because then you could do await create user and log in, let user equals that, and then you have the user synchronously to write the next step.
Right,
but
and
you can't do that.
Well, you can. It's like you then waterfall, and it's
exactly.
And by the way, I know you feel this way, but that's like a non-starter for me.
Non-starter, yeah. The sci.with server is basically one dot then, but then I would just do like let user sci.with server and then set it like that, and that works because within the callback you're in synchronous Mirage land, and so it's working fine. Does your with server, it still runs like the Mirage server in the Cypress window, not the app window? Or yep.
Okay. So this is like just this is like a
just hiding it.
API, like huge API improvement.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I guess this does
really
give you like, it is interesting too. Like before we would do like let server, and then before each server equals make server, and then
it should work.
And then server.create.
So
that's like all of Mirage is kind of exposed to every test, where with your thing, you actually have like just one entry point into Mirage, and that's going to let you, if you ever wanted to add like other stuff, you could just add it there, and you don't have to go update every test,
Totally. Absolutely. No, it's great. It's just, I wish you could just say like sci.mirage.create or sci.server.create or whatever, but you can't. You have to pass in a callback because of the way Cypress works. It queues all these things up. It doesn't run any of them, and they hate async await because they hate children, I guess. I don't know. So bad. I just don't think there's any justification for it, but maybe I'm not. I've read the page. I know that there's a page. I've read it, but I think it's not too bad though.
Yeah.
Aside from that, the setup is really nice, and it's just awesome it's just awesome.
The Cypress stuff, definitely. Ember used to have that type of API where there'd be one promise.
Global promise chain. Yeah, every visit and click appends.
And then you run the promise at like basically your test is like setup code. And then you run the promise. And then Ember switched to using async await, and
it was so much better.
So much better. And not only that, like just like the confusion of like if you do like a visit and then a console log, like why does a console log show up before the visit? And like
exactly,
if you're like your team's Ember lead, you can explain it, but it just like was one of those conversations that we were always having, and it just went away with async await.
It really did. It made there's so many times it made things so much better, and like async await has pitfalls. Like I think one of the biggest pitfalls is like the biggest valid criticisms of it is like it makes asynchronous code look sync, which is why it's easier to read in the happy path case, but it's actually hiding the actual complexity of the fact that it's async UI. Like JavaScript is async anyways, and so whereas in Rails, when you make a database call, there's nothing happening in between those steps that's a concern of the programmer, but in UI, between those steps, the JavaScript is still responsive. There's still an event loop listening for things. Your state of your program could change. So that's a valid criticism against async await, because now it's like, how do I handle the in-between case here? And it's like, you're not really thinking about that.
Dude, great point, because it's one of the bugs I had to fix this week was
let
set state, run an async command, and then set some other state. And it turns out that async command started changing what was rendering. And so cannot set state on unmounted components. So now all this is mounted stuff. And it's just like, it's exact. I mean, just everything you just said, just nodding right along.
Yeah. Async await is like optimized for like a happy path case, or it's really good in like Node if you're doing, again, like file system or database like things in a script. For UI, I can understand there's valid complaints against. I still prefer it to promise. Like I'm so happy it exists and I use it all the time. But that is like the valid vector of criticism. However, in freaking tests, you're more in a situation that's similar to writing file systems or database queries, because you're like, visit this, do this. You don't, from the perspective of the programmer, you actually don't care what's happening in between my visit and my click. Like, you don't have to account for that as a test author. See what I'm saying?
That's an excellent insight.
So all the more reason to use async and await and not do some. There's no reason to have a queue abstraction. You're literally wanting to wait one step to the next. And like you said, if you want to console log something, you want it to be in between you want to visit the thing, console log, and then click. And you want conceptually, the only time you'll ever want to console log right there is after the visit happens and before the click happens. Just like if you were console logging in between two lines of Ruby after a database query and before you send an email, that's what you're writing. There's no other possibility there. So, yeah, end rant. I just that part is still annoying, and I just don't. Yeah, it would just make things simpler.
It's really good because you do care about the in between in the UI world, because there's literally pixels that need to remain interactive. Yeah, right. While the user's clicking around, but in the test case, you actually don't care about the in between.
You
because none of your test code is running in between it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some code. Yeah. Okay, I was going to say maybe there's some
code. The app can be responsive, but the test is not. The test is not.
The test is a series of steps.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So maybe they'll have a come to Jesus moment at some point, just like Ember did. And we'll all have a massive major version increase in Cypress where we change all of our code. Because that was pretty painful, right? The API upgrade in Ember. It was just a big change.
Yeah, I remember. I think that was that was one of my first times using async await in JavaScript.
Yeah,
that was very early days.
It had just come out. Yeah.
They were championing a lot of that. And so I remember, like, why do we need this? I can totally explain why the global promise chain works, and
right,
you use it for 2 weeks, and you're like, if I could go back in time, I'd slap myself.
Yeah, totally. Cool. But yeah, just to end that, really happy with the setup right now. That app is really fun to work on right now, so it's pretty awesome.
Dude, it's so crazy how once you get good testing, how much happier development is.
Oh my gosh, it's insane. I was just thinking about that, and now it's I can experiment with all these different things, and I can just run my test suite. I keep making little refactorings. I made change my ad. I had this ad goal, if you add CrossFit 3 times a week or whatever, it would just open in line, and it was this ugly little thing. I was I want to make it a modal, and have it slide up from the bottom. When you click done, and I'll talk about this in a second, what happens. I changed all this stuff, just being able to rerun the test, and it's so fast, and it's just awesome. It's yeah. It goes back to what I was saying in that other episode, where it's from now on, I'm going to be way better about this when it comes to side projects, because it's just, it makes it way more fun to work on an app like that. Way, way more. Let's upgrade all these dependencies. Yeah, let's try out Next, whatever. Let's try this new version of React. Let's try out all this stuff. And you feel confident in your test suite. It's just it's crazy how different it is,
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
I know you like the hack, the painting.
Yeah, I remember, what was it? It was 9 months ago. We were setting up these Hasura apps with Next, and it was just we just got to code, right?
I know.
So I think if we were arguing about Zustance stores and modules,
no, for sure,
it's killed it.
It's more now that I have the pieces in a place that I'm happy with. If I was going to start my my lifting tracking app, which I have in the back of my mind, I would just do all this stuff, and I would start from testing from the beginning, because it would actually be the fastest way to do it. Show me the home screen when there's tracking one lift or whatever, and I just know I'm going to want to do that. I don't even want to use Hasura. Honestly, it's you almost want local first development. You want to get the thing from Hasura. You want to configure the schema. You're doing it all locally. So as soon as you are in this painting phase, which is just as frictionless as if you were to hook up production Firebase or Hasura, but you just happen to be doing it locally. Now you already have right there. Your test is right there. Whatever scenario you set up, you just paste it into a test, boom, and then you deploy it and it works because the contract. I mean, that's like, I really think that is possible. It just requires some work. All that stuff could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I think a service, that's really cool. Like a service with like local first development mentality is kind of a neat idea.
I mean, that definitely goes into like it's a selling point because it's testable.
Yep.
I will say just like, I also think 9 months ago, like we weren't happy with our stack.
Right.
And so I think now that we are
right
with Next and GraphQL and Hasura,
right.
It makes it easier for us to say, okay, we know those things and we're going to invest more in the test setup.
Yep. Before,
absolutely. Last year it was like trying out Gatsby, trying out
testing library, and Jest, Yeah. So,
and those things I wanted to like get to them as quickly as possible.
Right.
Amplify, build a whole Amplify app.
Right.
Like I didn't want to spend months doing
rest in peace.
Hey, I still.
No, you liked it.
There's one Amplify app that I still use, and its use case is awesome with Amplify. There's another one that was just like, it was more of a CRUD app, and it was just RIP.
Yeah. What about the app? Didn't you make one with what's like the log-based storage thing?
Oh,
Logux.
Logux, yeah, but that never got deployed. That never got.
Oh yeah, it was like a PR. It was like a branch.
Well, I think that was just local. That's somewhere on my computer.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that stuff is fun.
Nice.
The Amplify stuff at least made it to production.
Yeah.
Got RIP'd.
Okay, cool. And then the last thing here, again, just more kind of like vanilla React, vanilla Next, like building an app thing. So, first, I guess, is, this modal pattern. So I'm trying to make my fitness app feel kind of like an iPhone app, I guess, just so it feels kind of natural. I'm really only designing it and building it for working on mobile screens right now because that's the only place like me and my friends use it. And, it made me look at some patterns on the iPhone. Most of the iPhone, the native apps, if you like go to contacts and you click like add contact, it's going to bring up a modal and you're going to fill it out. And there's going to be like a done button in the top right. Looks like a link. It's kind of styled just like blue text, but it's a button. And you click on it and it just goes away. You don't click on done and then it like gives you a spinner, and it doesn't like dim the whole thing or whatever. It just happens immediately. And a lot of the APIs, obviously, on the native apps on the iPhone are like writing to local storage. So not like the web local storage, but like the device's storage. And so they don't need to have a loading state there because it's like a synchronous operation. But a lot of the iPhone apps copy this pattern. So like in Instagram, it's the same thing. Let's say you post something, or Twitter. You do a new tweet, the modal comes up, you fill it out, and you hit tweet. It doesn't sit there and show you the tweet and spinner while it's waiting. The modal goes away immediately. And then you see you're back in the home screen where the whole app is responsive and it's starting to write the new tweet. And there's a blue line that's coming up showing the progress.
Mm-hmm.
So one, that's just interesting because it's not usually what you see in like a lot of web UIs where, you click a button and you're waiting to make sure it works. And then you finish and move on.
Yeah. Okay, this might be like too early to make this comment, but like, I feel like in a lot of the web UIs, projects tend to have like buttons with like is loading, like an is loading attribute. And like you pass true into that and it shows like a little spinner next to the button or whatever. I feel like that stuff encourages you to put the form into a loading state.
Right.
Where with, maybe if we didn't have that stuff and that was harder to do, it feels like it almost feels like, well, if you design these components before you design the UI, you end up with APIs like that.
The UI.
That exactly. That then influence the UI. So it's
interesting.
Because I think you need like my default of like how the system should work wouldn't be what you just described.
Right.
But from a product point of view, what you just described is way better.
Right.
So just
Pretty interesting. And then you think about like pulling things out of React. So let's say you wanted to build that modal and Twitter, and you hit done, and so now like what would you do? Like your new tweet form has like a on submit prop, and then the parent says new tweet form on submit equals like handle like create new tweet, right? Or tweet or whatever. And so now you have this function that's in the parent that is saying like set loading to true, create await, create tree, a tweet, and like the blue bar is going. What if the user taps away? Actually, sending the post request to create a tweet is also not tied to any pixels on the screen. So if you think about it, what you really want to do is submit the form and you create the tweet. Maybe like you call an action somewhere, or you call your Zustan store create tweet, because that thing is just running regardless of what component is rendered. Mm-hmm. And then you have like a did submit callback prop that the parent can say, okay, now hide the modal, render the UI, but like the loading UI, but it also can just go away. If you went to settings, your tweet would still be going off into the server. And then if you happen to re-render the homepage again, it would now show the new tweet just because of the fact that it's loading it. So It's kind of interesting. It's like, it's a kind of a cool pattern where you're pulling apart the parts of the submit handler that have to do with the pixels on the particular tree that's rendered versus the logic that has nothing to do with React. Basically, it's like creating the database stuff.
Yeah, just to push back this, like I push back against this, like just two things. Like one is it does introduce more states in your app, and that might be harder to deal with. Like if a user can send a tweet and then start doing other stuff in the application, it might be a better experience, and it might be like a requirement, but it does create more states in your app.
Does it though, or do those states just exist? I mean, what if you hit that back button, when you submit the thing? What if you did click something that dismissed the modal form? I mean, you could disable the entire app, but in general, I bet a lot of the forms that you have that you put into loading state don't lock the app.
No, they don't. I mean, they don't. But just the fact that like when the loading spinner comes up on the button and the form grays, let's just say the UI locks up, right? The UI grays up.
It's easier in some case. You're just
tells the user like, okay, you're going to be it's like very series of steps. Like you're not going to be sending another tweet while this one is still in flight. You're not everything is. And so I do think that is easier. And the other thing I'll say, and this is like a straw man, but I have seen apps where these API calls, this way of thinking,
I'll go through an indirection layer.
Yes, and they all get pushed out to the outside so that anything can call them, and there's so much indirection where there's like, again, if it's coming from like a product point of view, like I need to be able to send this to do it and use the app, like we can come up with ways. But where someone says, oh, I heard on a podcast that you should push all your stuff to the boundary, and you do that.
Then you have this other directory. Well, for the record, I undid it. I mean, I didn't actually build it, but I ended up, again, with just one submit handler because I really do like keeping things. I would rather organize, as my component gets like 100, 200 lines, and there's like 3 handlers, and there's all this stuff. Instead of like pulling that apart and making like these abstraction layers, I'd rather just have smaller components that do like one thing, and just have a function in render and create it and waiting, await is load, set is loading, await, set is loading false. I like that. It's super easy to understand. So that's kind of what I was doing. I went back to that. And what I did, which I was using Slack, and I realized when you send a message or you upload an image, they actually do a similar thing where they bring the modal up. But when you hit the button, it actually does go into a spinner on the modal, and then the modal comes down. Because what was happening was I was creating a new goal, modal comes up, and if you hit done and it goes away immediately, then you actually have to consider what the home screen UI should be. Because even if the home screen UI does like a refetch, which in my case I do, right? I just like send the tweet or send the goal creation to GraphQL, hide the modal, and then the home page is like, oh, did create goal, did save or whatever, did create refetch the homepage query so it shows a new goal. But then you see the two states, the flash. So then it's like, it kind of goes to what you're saying, which is like you'd have to thoughtfully consider what it should look like while it's being refetched. In Twitter's case, you have like a blue bar. I didn't want to build all that. I just really wanted to keep the modal up for a second, and then just once the background is reloaded, show it. So all I did was, that's what I did. You hit done, and it turns into a little spinner. Because again, there's no real like precedent for this in native iOS apps, I think. Like you never press done and it turns into a spinner. But the Slack UI felt pretty close, where you press it, and instead of like showing a whole spinner of a thing or dimming, you just the done button is replaced with a spinner. And then it's pretty nice, actually. And then it just goes down. And then like the homepage has your new goal, which is what you'd expect. I just hit done. Yeah, I saw it created. It should be in the homepage by the time I see the homepage again. So I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see like what the good optimistic UI strategies are for like what you originally wanted to build.
Right. Well, I did build my photos part like that. So when you upload a photos for angles for a day, you do the front, side, and back angles. You click upload, it shows a modal. You choose the 3 photos on your phone. It's using your next S3 upload thing, which, by the way, is just awesome. If people are looking for a solution there, it's really good. And then you hit done, and the modal goes away, because otherwise you just sit there looking at that forever. And it uses a Zestan store in the scope of that page. And so that's all happening, which is pretty cool. And then I just do a fake loading bar, just like Twitter and Instagram do. And then because I don't have to think about anything else. It's done when it's done. And the query automatically updates. And so it just renders the new day with the new images. So that part, I do that, and it's pretty cool. But it's tied to that UI, and it's not like, And this kind of leads into my next question, which is like, I still haven't gone down this path of like, use goals, use weekly goals, use categories, use photos. And I know there's some people who do that. I think like I heard Tanner Lindsley talk about this. But so I ran into this thing where as I was working on this and changing the UI, first I had the goal form was like a dumb goal form. It didn't have any actions in it, and it just had non-submit. And then on submit, the parent had handled the actual goal creation. So the parent had the GraphQL mutation, which is like 5 lines, but it's just down there. It has to use mutation, pass that in. Then it has to have an async function that's like actually calling create goal, right? And it's setting loading to true and then false. Then I like refactored and went back, made the goal component smart, the goal form smart, and it knows how to create a goal. And so I had to copy like these different parts of code. And I did that like a couple times. And I was like, I kind of would like to be able to make these changes to the UI faster. Like, and this is not changing at all. So like, should I have like a use goals here where I can just call that very easily? And like, what would that look like?
So
have you ever done that before?
Yeah. And when you're telling this, I have a great answer to this is, I use Apollo, and Apollo, you have to manage cache. You have to, like, you want to stay on the Apollo happy path. You're managing the cache. And, a lot of times you have queries you want to invalidate, after an update, you've changed some like deeply nested query.
Right.
So
that was part of it too. Cause once I moved my creation into the form, I was like, oh, I'd really like this to just take care of everything, but I need to call refetch.
Yeah, so you start like reaching into like other completely unrelated parts of your application that just happen to be using the same resource. Like it happens to be using a goal or a goal count or something.
Yeah, I guess this is where like Urkel would have solved that too.
Well, with the Apollo stuff, like at this point, it feels so uncomfortable for me to reach into other parts of the app.
Right.
This is a driver for me to say, okay, if you need anything goal related, you're going to go through use goal. And so you're not actually writing the GraphQL queries yourself. I mean, you are because you're the developer and the consumer of it. But
right.
From the components point of view, you're just using goal, and you get like a few functions to update a goal, create a goal, list all goals.
Right.
And from the hooks point of view, you've now like constrained what access people have. And so when you want to change something, you can be sure that like you can invalidate a query,
right?
And any goals in your app are going to get that. That always feels like, by the way, I'm not like I'm only like, I don't know, a year into this, and I still feel like I start exactly how you started out with passing queries back and forth, making components smart or dumb. And then at the point where I'm like, feel really awkward to like reach into some other page just to invalidate something on it, or like weirdly like just like start exporting queries of like out of random pages. Makes no sense. At that point, I refactor to the use thing, and it seems fine, but it probably only happens like, I don't know, 20% of the time, 25% of the time.
So the rest of it, you can keep it like that.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping for like one answer for all this, but it's nice to have no friction like that when you're starting out and when you're working on a small component.
I think if you knew,
it's kind of weird to see a use goal, but not like a use weekly, like not use category or whatever.
Yeah. I think if you knew like this, I'm writing like use blog post, and it's going to be used on like 20 different pages in the app. Like it's going to be used on the home page. It's going to be used on like the account settings page. I think you can almost like start out by like TDDing like the hook, like the use blog post hook, and like start making it work for like one use case, but like you're doing it in like a TDD way. But like when I start writing, especially like with Hasura and stuff and GraphQL, like I'm not making it for like 20 different pages. I'm making it for one page.
Right.
My apps just don't have that many pages. So
right. Interesting. I have gotten away from like the exporting the query thing. I'd rather have it be explicit. So like if the goal form is smart and creates a goal, I'm going to have like a did create on create prop that the parent can say, okay, now I'm going to refetch, because refetch is already in scope. They're the ones who are running the query. That feels better to me.
Yep.
But it's still the same thing. And it's like you would like it to just do it automatically. I guess Urkel would do it automatically in this case, because it knows that the homepage query is fetching a list of all goals, and now one of them's changed, so it would just work. So that's pretty cool. I remember having like some real magic moments when I was using Urkel on that one, on my recipes project. So maybe that's one answer. Another one is like
I know you would hit a thing in your app where you're like, I don't want that to refetch, or like it's just like I want to have control over that refetch.
Right, over the state change or whatever.
And you would lose that. So
interesting. But the other thought is just like the constraining of the interface that you're doing by saying you have to go through use goals is like, I'm just so resistant to that, because the whole GraphQL was designed to write it alongside the component. And in this particular app, my homepage is like this crazy nested thing. So, it's actually precisely wrong for a constraint thing. You want to be able to say, I want my weekly goals, and then also my categories, and also like the users. And so I like that flexibility.
Dude, it's exactly how you started off with your module import thing, where like you don't want ceremony about initializing apps. Like you don't want ceremony around like, this is how you get access to a resource, and like, oh, too bad, I don't support that. So you have to come back and add it. And
exactly.
I've been happy with what I've been doing, which is just when it needs to be organized, at that point I organize it. I'm not having one way, basically starting off with queries in GraphQL.
I'm trying to think if I could snap my fingers here. You have the modal up, you click done, and I think it might just be the Urkel thing. You're creating a goal, and every query that's reading from goals is reading. There's a single. It's like getting an event. It's like getting a log message. Like goals have changed, and so here's how do you handle it? That's almost what you want. Like, because then the goals could change for other reasons too, and then you can say, do you want to like slide them in, or just fade them in, or just append them? And now you've already handled the case where the user on the device creates a goal, or you create a goal some other way. So that would be interesting. Like query did change or something like that. On query change. Like you have your homepage, you have a query, and then you have like an on query change where you get to say what happens to the UI.
Yeah.
And in the default case, it just calls set state, which is like what happens when you refetch and like what Urkel does. But you could also do things that you wanted to.
Yeah. I worry.
But you do it at the point of the query, as opposed to connecting it to like a form submission from another part of the UI, because that's where you get bummed out in terms of moving these pieces around.
Yeah. I worry with this stuff that sometimes we find, not us, but just like us, everyone in general, you end up describing the transition and then like you just get into so much trouble.
Yeah.
I like the Apollo stuff.
Interesting. I haven't used Apollo yet. It's like there's too many tabs on their navigation on their page that I haven't used it yet. That's like,
dude, it's. I mean, I think it's the best GraphQL client, but it's you're taking on you're writing a cache manager, and there's just no way around it, and you're just lying to yourself if you think you cannot do that.
Right. No, we've worked with lots of people. There's been multiple people we worked with or talked with that have said like, yeah, people don't take the time to understand the cache, and it's like worse, for that.
Yeah.
I should try it though. I know that's popular. Yeah,
you'd like it. Cool. You'd like it because then you can definitely. You're like, I have all the excuses I need to create a use goals.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, still playing with suspense mode enabled on SWR, even though it's an alpha and React is alpha. That'll be nice when that lands. I have no idea when that's going to be, but it's working so far. I thought I had some bugs. I ran into a bug in Headless UI's modal in React Alpha with strict mode on. I had to turn off strict mode, but if it does a double render in alpha, the modal says that there's a focus problem. There's no focusable elements, and it was just driving me batty. I couldn't figure it out, and I was like, wait, I'm on like an experimental version of React, and I like put it back to 17 or 18, I mean, and that was it. So I'm like really treading on water here, like thin ice here.
Yeah, man.
But I'm here for it. For some reason, I have the energy for it.
I'm still on 17. I'm afraid, man. I'm afraid.
The suspense stuff is really, really cool, though. It really is awesome.
Nice.
So, cool. All right, shall we wrap it?
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for joining us. And let us know if you have any questions or anything you want us to talk about. Front End First FM on Twitter. And otherwise, we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.